I'm going to give you a smarter framework for how to look at this, because at the moment, peptides are the Wild West, and people assume that they are all the same thing. That's a bit like saying a motorbike, a Formula One car, and an e-scooter are all the same because they all have wheels. Peptides do very different things and have very different safety profiles. They range everything from approved medications that are prescribed by doctors to compounds of questionable efficacy and safety, all the way to grey and black market peptides which carry real health and legal risks. So if we want to be sensible about this, we need a better way of thinking. So here are 5 questions that if I were considering taking a peptide, what I would ask myself before going any further. But before we dive in, a quick legal disclaimer. So let's quickly get clear on what peptides are. They are a small chain of amino acids. Amino acids are the building blocks that make up protein. So if you imagine an amino acid as a bead, this is a chain of beads that would form maybe a necklace. Whereas if you're thinking of a full protein that's 100 to thousands of amino acids long, it would be more like imagine those beads build a crown. So peptides are normally in that 2 to 50 amino acid range, and the number and order of sequence of those peptides determines their use and function across different parts of the body. And you can sometimes even combine peptides to make what we call polypeptides. And in the body, naturally, there are hundreds, if not thousands of these occurring. But what we're concerned about is the ones that are used and marketed with a medical intervention for a specific purpose. Because they're so wide-ranging, they can do different things. Some peptides are hormones like insulin or oxytocin. Others influence nerve activity, metabolism, or tissue repair. Most importantly, most peptides have multiple effects. So when a peptide is targeted at a specific system or an organ, it will have some downstream effects, sometimes in ways that we don't fully understand. That's why dose duration, context, and supervision matter so much, and why the way peptides talked about online often misses the bigger picture. Knowing this is going to help you towards the end of the video when we look at how they're taken. So first, what am I trying to optimize for? In other words, why am I taking this peptide? General health is way too vague, especially for peptides, which are often very powerful and very specific. So be very clear on what you're aiming for. Is it something like performance and recovery, where people have been known to take BPC 157? Is it metabolic health, where we're controlling glucose or appetite regulation like Ozempic or the newer retatrutide? Is the goal to improve cognitive function or mood, like those taking Somorelin? Is it injury repair or tissue healing, like those taking TB500? Another question to ask is, are you optimizing for health span or lifespan? So health span being quality of life, your performance, maybe things like sleep, or the actual length of time that you're alive. Currently, if you go on Peptides, there are only 2 that are deemed for longevity. There's the CJC 1295, and that has really questionable safety data in humans. And the other one being epithalon, which in human data is actually not as hyped up as it was in the animal data with its ability to extend life and health span. Then the final thing to ask yourself is this something that is correcting a deficiency or making up for a process that has slowed down? Or is there a benefit to being higher than normal physiological levels, like say with the growth hormone like peptides? Then you want to ask yourself, what are the trade-offs? Is it to get faster results where we're not sure about the long-term effects? Is it convenience versus safety? And we always have to think of also the fact that you have to inject most of these, the cost implications, and the legalities of some of these compounds. And we need to ask ourselves, can we achieve that goal with a lower risk intervention? Have we optimized our sleep and our nutrition, all those fundamentals first? Because peptides should rarely be thought of something that's a just in case. But the next question we want to ask ourselves is, what actually is it? I mean, it sounds obvious, but it isn't trivial. What's the known or proposed mechanism of action? Which receptor or pathway does this work on? How strong is the evidence? Is it human trials? Is it approved indications? Or is it mostly animal or lab data? Ask yourself, is it a naturally occurring human peptide? Is it a fragment or an analog or a modified peptide designed to increase potency? What system does this peptide primarily act on? Then ask yourself, do I understand at a basic level what signal this peptide is sending in the body? And the answer doesn't always have to be yes, but we need to know enough collectively about it to ensure that at least that it's safe. Is it being used as an approved medical therapy, an off-label prescription, or a research chemical that's sold outside medical systems? Because if you can't explain what the peptide is trying to tell your body to do, then that in itself is a warning sign. But it also doesn't help help us answer the next question, which is, how do I know if it's working? I would track this in really three broad categories. Sometimes you can do one, sometimes you can do two, sometimes you can do all three. But the first one is symptoms, and ask, have I got an improvement in my mood, energy, sleep, maybe pain or appetite, if that's what you're targeting. Then the next one is functionality. Has my recovery time improved, my training tolerance, or my body composition that I've measured on a DEXA scan, for example? And then finally, where appropriate, you have biomarkers that you can measure in the blood. So it could be things like your blood sugar levels, your inflammation markers, or certain hormones. Because if you can't clearly define what the improvement would look like, it's very hard to justify the risk. And peptides can cause real physiological changes in the body. So that's why monitoring and reassessment are essential when you're thinking about or taking these. So the next bit is the really all-important thing, which is the risk and reward, because that's going to comprise a few things. Firstly, the magnitude. So what is the benefit, but how big is that benefit, and does it justify what the risks are? How likely are the risks? What are they? What's the worst case scenario? How confident are we in the data that backs up both of those arguments? And finally, how good is the quality, and how much will that quality impact those risk-reward equations that we have? Because this is where peptides differ from most supplements. They can produce meaningful effects, but also meaningful downsides if used poorly. You're weighing up how big the benefit is, how certain we are about it, and what the risks actually are. The magnitude of the benefit is basically, is it a subtle or a meaningful change, or is it short-term and reversible or longer lasting? Some peptides produce obvious measurable effects, and others are far more subjective. Bigger, faster effects usually come with bigger trade-offs. But some of the general common risks to consider are things like acute effects, so maybe nausea, headaches, maybe even some flushing. Then there may be some hormone or metabolic dysregulation. We can become desensitized to certain things as well. And always the thing that we need to consider is the unknown unknowns. So there may be some long-term unknown effects from these, especially with long-term prolonged use and stacking these peptides together. Not every side effect means something dangerous, but it does mean that something is happening in the body that we should be aware of. And the final bit that we discuss is how we take it. And really with that comes the quality and purity of what we are taking. Because what we need to be aware of is things like manufacturing standards, purity and sterility, good injection technique, and then storage, legality, and some professional consequences, especially if you're an athlete and what that implies as well. But also remember that a good molecule done badly will often have the opposite effect. So a simple rule of thumb that I use for considering any molecule is that the higher the uncertainty or potential risk around it, the higher the bar I need to justify taking it. So that means everything from taking it for a shorter amount of time, the lowest possible dose, monitoring more closely, being much quicker to take it off or stop it if I notice any symptoms, and also really needing a good solid reason for taking it. Because if the benefit is vague and the risk is concrete, then it's usually a no. So how would I use it and where would it come from? This is the bit that people want to mostly skip straight to, but often the bit where people make the most mistakes, because two people can use the same peptide and have two very different outcomes, not because it's a different molecule, but because how they used it and where they sourced it from. This question is where we need a bit more realism, because peptides don't all sit in the same category. And in the UK, the rules and the level of strictness is very different compared to that of the US. Because with peptides, how you use them and where you source them from both make up part of the risk profile. So dose, duration, supervision, and sourcing all matter just as much as the peptide itself. So here are some core practical takeaways. Firstly, the route matters. Most peptides aren't oral, they're injectable. That immediately raises the bar for hygiene, technique, storage, and supervision. If something requires injection, it should earn its place. Number two, dose and duration matter. With peptides, more is not better. A sensible approach usually means the lowest effective dose, a clear purpose, a defined time frame, and if there's no plan for how long you'd use it or when you'd stop, that's a red flag. Number three, monitoring matters. Responsible use means being able to tell if it's working. This could be symptoms like pain, appetite, sleep, or energy, functional ability like recovery or training tolerance, biomarkers where appropriate, and if there's nothing you plan to monitor, you're flying blind. The source and the quality matter. Rather than asking, where can I buy this? Ask, is it regulated? Is the purity and sterility assured? And is there accountability if something goes wrong? This is why the prescription peptides are deemed the safest of the bunch. Then it's important to know the UK risk category that you're stepping into. Then finally, always have an exit plan. Before starting, you should be clear on what success looks like and when or what would make you stop. If you don't have that, then you shouldn't really be starting. So remember, with peptides, how you access it matters just as much as what it is. A good framework can help you understand what to take, but also recognize what not to. So remember, peptides are not just strong supplements. They are signaling molecules that can meaningfully affect physiology, often across multiple systems at once. Peptides aren't necessarily good or bad by default. They're tools, and powerful ones at that. And like any tool, before you want to use it properly, you need to understand why you're taking it, what it is, how you know it's working, and if it's a good source, which is particularly important in this instance. If there's one key takeaway, it's this: clarity beats hype. You don't need to understand every single peptide. You just need a way to think about them so that you understand them clearly. And if a peptide doesn't stand up to these 5 questions, it's not a failure, it's the framework doing its job. So use it to ask better questions, understand the real risk of something, and use it to help guide you to make better decisions to support your long-term health. If you'd like me to break down a specific peptide and take you through this framework with a given example, please pop in the comments below which ones you'd like me to do. Otherwise, if you want a similar framework for supplements to help you understand whether it's right for you, check out this playlist here. Otherwise, if you'd like to support the channel completely for free, all you need to do is subscribe, and that will help us continue what we're doing to help you make better decisions about your health.